Hello everybody and welcome to this, my second of two videos on the EOS Rebel T6, also called the Canon EOS 1300D and the Canon Kiss X80. All three of them the same cameras, just sold in different places. In the first video we talked about what everything on the camera was. In this video we're going to talk about how to use it for your photography and to take pictures with this camera. The first thing is, being a digital camera, this can do nothing whatsoever without a fresh battery. To change the battery, you simply open up the battery door here and then push this little button off on the side, and the springs inside the battery compartment will partially eject the battery. This uses a Canon LPE10 battery, which is this one right here. We're going to pop it out and put in this third-party battery, which is that one right there. This can only go in one way, so if it fits in, you know you've put it in correctly. And we'll turn it on, make sure everything works. It does. We have full battery power, and we're ready to go and start using this camera. Next thing we're going to do is put in a memory card, because without a memory card, we can't take any photos anyway. So I guess I shouldn't have closed this because we're going right back to the same spot. So I've got a 4 gig memory card here, which is not very big for this camera. It can take, and it uses an SD card, either SD, SDHC, or SDXC, any size up to 2 terabytes. And class 6 or faster are recommended for video. This is an SDHC, so it might, no, this is too slow for video. This memory card would not work for video. I don't think I have one that will work for video with me today either. At any rate, if you're going to use a memory card with this camera, you should probably just get a class 10, which is an SDXC, even if we're only talking about 32 gigs or so, because that will give you faster write speeds, which will give you better use of your camera's onboard buffer. To insert the video or the SD card, you just find the SD port, and if you can look at the back of the camera and read the SD card text, push it in till it clicks, and then close the battery chamber, and you're ready to go. Now with this 4 gig memory card, I can record 144 raw images. So that should give you an idea of how many images you can record with memory cards of different sizes. 2 gigs would be around 70 images. 32 gigs would be around 1600. Next, let's talk about how to mount and unmount lenses. It's very simple. To remove a lens, you push the lens release button down and then turn it counter or anti-clockwise until it comes off of the camera. This can take either EF or EFS lenses, and mounting them is the same process. EFS lenses have a white square. You line that white square up with the white square on the lens mount. EF lenses have a red circle. You line that up with the red circle on the lens mount, and then you just turn clockwise until they click into place, and now you've mounted them. Very simple, very easy process. This camera would have come with a kit 18 to 55 millimeter lens like this one included when I picked it up. Next thing is, let's talk a little bit about how to use the flash. The flash hot shoe is right here, and the flash sync speed is 1/200th of a second and slower. So you can use the flash at 1/200th of a second. You could use it at 1/60th or 5 seconds, and it would work. You could not use it at speeds faster than 1/200th of a second. There may be some Canon EX flashes that allow high-speed sync. I am not an expert in Canon EX flashes. If there are, somebody will have left a comment shortly after this video goes live in the comments section. One thing you do not want to do with this camera is buy an old flash. What I mean by old is like a Vivitar or Sunpack or similar manual flash from the 60s through the 90s. Those old flashes were way more powerful than modern flashes. And they had capacitors in them that discharged tons of electricity. The those old capacitors could discharge into old film cameras, which would not be affected by the voltage. Modern digital cameras can be fried if those old flashes static discharge into the flash hot shoe. It doesn't happen every time. It's not necessarily a guarantee, but it's a high enough risk that if it does happen, it will destroy or runs the risk of destroying your DSLR. So if you are going to use an old flash, like one of those old Vivitar 283 flashes or similar, what you want to do is get an RF adapter or RF signaler to plug into the flash hot shoe, put a flash bar on the bottom of your camera, and then take your old, stupidly powerful flash, connect it to the RF receiver, and plug that into the flash bar. Or just use this in autofocus. Just use this in autofocus and hand hold your old, stupidly powerful flash with the radio connection between the camera and that flash. You don't want to have any kind of physical connection between them. Hand holding a flash, by the way, really good way of using it because it allows you to angle the light of the flash exactly as you want it so that you can get really good results. So if you're going to hold your camera down here and then hand hold your flash way above it and off to the side, you can really sculpt the light within a space to flatter people. So some basic flash use tips. The worst possible flash you can use on a camera is the pop-up flash. When you have a flash mounted right here, shooting light at your subject that bounces off of it back to your lens, it makes your subjects look really flat and waxy. It's not flattering to any subject at all. So your best bet for flashes are, instead of having it above your lens, to have it off to the side. If you do have it above your lens, try to get a flash that can articulate like this to bounce your light off the ceiling, back to your subject, back to your lens. Now, the reason for that is because whenever we see something, whether we're outside under the sun, indoors underneath overhead lights, we see them illuminated from above. So our brain says illuminated from above is natural. You want to mimic that with your artificial light. So that's just a very basic flash technique. Any of the modern Canon flashes will have articulating and rotating heads, so you can do that. Okay, so next up, let's take a look at the different shooting modes on this camera. This is everything on this dial. We are going to start at video and go through manual. The PDF instruction manual shows on page 76 through 79 for the different scene modes, which are the second one we're going to look at through the mode right before the green box. The instruction manual on pages 76 through 79 has a meatball chart of ambience settings for those pre-programmed modes. We're not going to cover those. We're just going to talk about what these modes do. Also, for video shooting mode, which is the first one we're going to talk about, you must use the video record button, not the shutter release, to start the video recording. And that's this button right back here. For all of these modes, the Q button on the back pulls up different options. So let's start here with video mode, and we're going to hit the Q button. AF is your AF type. Flexizone, live mode, or quick. Quick is a quick autofocus. This looks for faces, and this is going to be your slowest but most accurate autofocus for general use with video. These are your white balance settings, and they're the same as the white balance settings we'll talk about later in the video for shooting stills, but it's auto, daylight for when you're out in daylight, shade for when you're in shaded areas though you're outside in daylight, cloudy for cloudy days, tungsten for when you're under tungsten light, fluorescent for when you're under fluorescent light, flash for, I don't know when you can't really use a flash with video, maybe for LED lights for video. I'm not sure. That's a weird one to have as an option for video. Oops. And custom, which will allow you to save a custom white balance setting for use with your video. And in here, if you use display, you can have auto ambience priority or white priority. So basically this is whether you're using auto white balance that balances for the ambiance of the room or balances to make whites white. We're going to go down here to your image. This is for your video, your video finishing. You want to keep this for video in neutral or faithful. Any video editor you're going to use is going to be able to give you better color toning than this camera can internally. This is highlight correction. Disable, low, standard, or high. Basically, this gives you flatter video tones and better highlight and shadow correction. It's sort of like a low-rent HDR for your video. This is your video size, as well as how much recording you can get on your SD card. So 1920 by 1080, oops, 30 frames per second, I can get 11 minutes and 17 seconds. 24 frames, same thing. 60 frames at 1280 by 720, 1117. It's not until I get down to 640 by 480 that I can get 30 frames per second and 30 minutes of recording, which is the maximum time for any setting that you can get with this camera. Here we go, 1920, we'll keep it at the highest resolution setting. 640 by 480 would be really great if we were displaying these videos on Windows 95 computers. This is your video snapshot display. And my understanding of this is that this shows a preview of 2, 4, or 8 seconds in your camera roll when you're scrolling through your video. ISO auto or fixed at one of the settings. Honestly, if you're gonna, you can use auto. If you're gonna use a higher ISO, you can get away with a little bit more on this camera in video than you can with stills. So 400 and 800 are totally doable for ISO settings with this camera. With video, you could probably push it to 1600 if you wanted to. And then to take a video, you just start recording, and now we know we're recording because there's a record light up here and the SD card is active. And we can now stop recording. There we go. Next mode is called Night Portrait, and what this does is it uses a longer shutter speed to capture a person standing or sitting in front of a nighttime background. This is best with a tripod and the flash will work. So let's say you have a person you want to take a picture of and you've got a cityscape in the background. What you can do is set it to Night Portrait, have them sit on a bench so that they can stay a little bit more motionless. Set up your camera on a tripod or on a bench or some other sort of flat surface that isn't going to move. Use a flash if you have it, and use this to get a longer shutter speed that will illuminate the person and the city in the background. Food mode, very popular food mode. What this mode does is it increases image brightness to make the food look more appetizing. Flash is not recommended for this mode, and it also adjusts the color tones towards warm so that the food looks tastier. And if you use the Q button, you can access some additional options like manually setting the the tones to warmer, or adjusting it so that you can turn off the built-in flash. And then you can adjust, oh, that was the wrong button there. Okay. Sports mode. Sports mode biases the camera towards a fast shutter speed to freeze motion and also sets the camera to burst firing. As you can see here, it's automatically set to burst. If we go into quick mode, however, we can override that. Oops, wrong button. Okay. Oh yeah, if we go into quick mode, it was the correct button. We can override that to self-timer continuous or self-timer. We can adjust the default settings to adjust the white balance. We can also adjust the image toning with the menu accessible with the Q button. Next, the flower is close-up mode. It sets the camera to single shot and works best with longer lenses or at the long end of your zoom, like 55 millimeters on your kit zoom. If we go into the quick button, we can do the exact same things that we did in sports mode. Adjust the color toning, adjust the default white balance, and adjust the drive mode. Landscapes uses the deepest depth of field possible, which is the smallest aperture, and works best with either the wide end of your kit lens or a wide angle lens, and also works best with a tripod because you're going to have a longer shutter speed. And again, if we go into the quick buttons here, we can make the same adjustments that we could previously to drive mode, white balance, and color toning. The face is portraits, and this sets the camera for a shallow depth of field, which gives you blurry backgrounds. And it works best with either longer lenses or the long end, like the 55 millimeter of your kit zoom. And again, using the quick button, we can adjust the same parameters: drive mode, white balance, and color toning. CA is Creative Auto, which allows you to adjust some settings for creative image results. So if we go into the quick button, we can adjust your color toning, your image toning here. We can adjust the background blurriness, sharp or soft. This is going to adjust your aperture, whether you have a wider aperture or a smaller aperture, and your drive mode and your built-in flash. Next we have flash disabled, which turns off your flash function and gives you basically its automatic mode with no flash. This is really good if you're indoor at an indoor play or an outdoor event or at a museum where flash use is prohibited. The green box is called Scene Intelligent Auto, and in this the camera controls everything. You have no control over whatever the camera wants to do. It's just going to do it, including operating the pop-up flash. See? Did not press the pop-up button, it just popped up the flash by itself. Okay, program mode, the P here. These modes here are where you're going to do most of your shooting in all probability because they give you the most control. So P stands for P stands for Program Auto Exposure, or Program. And in this mode, the camera selects all of the settings, but you can override them. So to override them, something called program shifting, what you want to do is press the shutter halfway and then use the command dial here to adjust your program settings. So program aperture, program AE or auto exposure allows you to control ISO and flash use. The green box does not. The green box will determine when the flash pops up and what your ISO should be. But with program mode, you can turn off the flash or turn it on and set your ISO, and the camera will not override those settings. So let's see here about how we're going to program shift. To program shift with the EOS Rebel T6, all you have to do is adjust the command dial, and that will adjust the shutter speed, and the camera will compensate with the appropriate aperture. Program shifting does not reset after use, and it will remember what shutter speed you set it to. But also, if you have select a shutter speed that does not allow a proper exposure with the available apertures in the lenses, that aperture number will flash in your display, so you know to select a different shutter speed. TV stands for shutter priority. You pick the shutter speed, and then the camera will pick the best aperture to give you the exposure that you need. So you select the shutter speed by using command dial. AV is aperture priority, And in AV mode, what you do is rotate the command dial to pick the aperture that your lens will stop down to, and then the camera will pick the best shutter speed. So basically, with AV and TV, you're controlling opposite things to obtain an exposure. The advantage to time value, to shutter priority, is that you can freeze or blur time intentionally. With aperture priority, you can control the depth of field. Full manual mode, the camera will let you pick the shutter speed and aperture, and if it's wrong, the camera doesn't care. If it's right, great. Camera also doesn't care. By default, the dial here adjusts the shutter speed. When you hold down the AV button and then rotate the dial, it adjusts the aperture. That's how you control full manual mode. In the viewfinder, let's see if I can show you what it looks like on the screen here. Okay, this right here that goes from 3 to 3 is your light meter bar. In the viewfinder, what you want to do when you're in manual mode are adjust your shutter speed and aperture to get a little line underneath that bar lined up with that center indicator. That's how you know you have a proper shutter speed and aperture for the lighting conditions that you're going to be using. So we talked about what the Q button does with these different scene modes already. Let's take a look at what happens when we press the Q button in program, shutter priority, aperture priority, or manual. Basically, it brings up information about our current settings. Shutter priority, our shutter speed, our ISO, meter reading. We're set to manual focus, but if we set this to autofocus, now we're in AI servo. It shows us the autofocus mode, drive mode, meter setting, image quality, and so forth. Basically, the Q button gives us the information about what our different settings are with the camera. It also shows us whether or not we have EV compensation going on. Next, let's talk about the four-way pad buttons here and what these do. If we push up, it gives us the ability to pick ISO. Basically, we can manually select between the different ISO settings as well as auto. We'll figure out in video 3 why it is 100's not lit up here. It should be. Sure, it has to do with whatever that D+ is. AF are the autofocus modes, one shot, AI focus, and AI servo. One shot will focus on a single subject and then take the picture. So basically, if you have a stationary subject, like a statue or something that you're taking a picture of on a tabletop studio, one shot will focus on it, and then the photos will be taken at that same focus point. AI focus is good for tracking subjects that are moving, and then AI servo will pick between one shot and AI focus as appropriate for whatever is going on in the scene. Your drive modes here, single shot, which means you hold the shutter button down, it will take a single picture, and you can hold that shutter button down until the universe is heat death and another photo will never be taken. Continuous is 3 frames a second, and the camera will keep taking pictures until the buffer underruns. Self-timer 10 seconds, self-timer 2 seconds. And this last option is self-timer continuous, and what that does is you select the number of shots. Okay. And then your self-timer will count down. And at the end of the countdown, it will take the number of shots that you selected. I selected 10. And you heard how the number of shots changed. The speed of them changed as the count went on. That's only because I'm shooting in RAW and overran the buffer. So basically, the buffer had to clear out before it would take more photos. White balance brings up our different white balance options. AWB is auto white balance, and if we hit the display button, we can pick between ambience priority, and white priority. Basically, same thing as we discussed earlier with this. With ambience priority, white balance is set to mimic the lighting of the scene. With white priority, it's set to make whites white. Daylight, which is approximately 5200K, as it tells you, is balanced so that whites look white under full sun. Shade is cooler, warmer. The adjustment in the camera makes the images warmer, which balances whites so that they look white in a shaded area with full sun, shade cast by an object blocking full sun. Cloudy is balanced for the light coming through clouds. Tungsten is balanced for tungsten lighting, which adds a heaping dose of blue to the images because tungsten creates a very orange light. White tungsten fluorescent light is balanced to add magenta because fluorescent lights bias towards green. Flash balances so that the blue light of your flash bulbs, which are xenon bulbs, it adds a little bit of warmth to the images so that whites are white. And custom is a setting we'll see in video 3 for selecting a custom white balance. I'm just going to leave that on auto. The set button here is basically it's the OK button all the time. The menu button will take us into the menus, and we'll see all of these in video 3, what the different menus are. AV compensation allows us to adjust the exposure compensation. So let's say that you're in a scene that's got a very large bright spot and it's throwing off your meter. You can underexpose to have that bright spot not be an overblown highlight. You can also use this if you want to manually bracket, say, 7 shots for an HDR. 3 stops under, 2, 1 stop under, properly exposed, up to 3 stops over. This is what you do. You just hit the AV button. In program, shutter priority, and aperture priority mode, the camera will automatically adjust the settings for your exposure compensation. In manual mode, it will give you the reading information you need to either underexpose or overexpose intentionally. This, the asterisk is the FE lock button, and what that does is that locks your flash exposure value in the camera so that your camera remembers your flash settings when you take your picture, and it doesn't adjust the compensate the exposure from your flash at the moment that you take a picture. This button here is your autofocus point selection button, and you press it and then rotate the command dial to select between all autofocus points automatically picked and then individual autofocus points being picked. Okay, so what good is it to be able to adjust your autofocus point? Well, let's say you're at a sporting event, okay? And let's say that this represents a car coming in at a car race. And you know that the car is going to travel this way across the scene in front of you. So you set your focus point for something right over here. And when the car comes in, you line it up with your focus point, and then you just track the car as it moves across the scene, keeping it in that focus point. That will keep the car in sharp focus, and it will show the track in front of it, which is a good compositional structure to have. If something's traveling in a way, you want to give it room in the frame to travel. And that's a really good use of that single autofocus point selection. Another one would be, let's say that you select this autofocus point over here, and you're taking a picture of a person, right? And this is their face. You can use this autofocus point to get that person's face in focus, and then the rest of their body will be in or out of focus depending on your specific camera angle and aperture. But using a single autofocus point where you want their face to be will give you focus on their face and not the beach or dog or whatever in the background. Okay, there is one thing we're going to do in the menu system with this camera in this video. We're going to go to playback menu 2 and we're going to go to the metering modes. You adjust the metering modes by going into the menu and hitting set. There are 3 metering modes in this camera: evaluative, partial, and center weighted. Evaluative is the box with the circle and the dot in the middle of it. Partial is the box with the circle, and center weighted is the box. So evaluative is a 63 zone light meter, and what it does is it looks at all of the zones, it looks at the light and dark in each zone, where the autofocus point is, where the camera is focused, what's further behind the subject, what's in front of the subject, and then with all of that data, it calculates a good exposure. Partial is a small circle within the central autofocus points that provides you the entirety of the metering data. And center weighted is that same area within the central autofocus points that provides the majority of the metering data, say 70-ish%. So 100% of the metering data from that small area in the center of the frame, roughly 70%. All of them have good uses. With partial, what you can do is take a meter reading off your subject's face, either dial it in with manual or lock it into place with your exposure lock, recompose to put your subject's face elsewhere and take the picture, or lock it in with your auto exposure lock and your shutter button. Oops. And center weighted is a similar thing, but also a good general walk around sort of meter setting. Evaluative is really good. Canon's evaluative metering system is really top notch. So this is a good setting to leave it in for the majority of subjects, unless you're trying to adjust for more complicated settings or do specific creative effects. So let's go through everything that we've seen with this camera so far and talk about how to take a picture with this camera. It's really simple. You want to look at what you're taking a picture of and set the setting to whatever you want it to be, okay? Then you're going to, if you have autofocus on, let the autofocus focus on your subject. If you're using a zoom, let the zoom out to the framing that you want to use. I wonder if the lens or if the camera has an issue because autofocus is not working for me. Interesting. You probably can't hear this, but when I have to press the shutter button, there's a ticking coming from the lens. That ticking sound is the autofocus motor trying to work, which means that this lens has a faulty autofocus motor. This is the second Canon camera today that has had a critical issue while I've been recording it. Anyway, let's charge ahead and talk about how to take a photo with it. So you're going to select your mode. You're going to dial in the settings that you need. You're going to have to press the shutter button and let the autofocus focus as it needs to. Adjust your framing as you need to. Take a picture. That's it. That's how you take a photo with this camera. It's super easy. It's designed to take as many quality photos as possible for you. And that is it. That is every function on the outside of the camera. In the next video, we're going to go into the menu system and into the custom functions, talk about what all of those are and how they affect and can influence your photography. Thank you for watching this video. Please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track producing content which is useful and helpful to you. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about checking these every couple of days and answering questions. If you have any suggestions or ideas for future videos, and if I have the technical know-how and equipment, I'm more than happy to make those. One last thing. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. I gotta get up, Steinbeck. I have to turn off the camera.